I'm Joyce, 32 female. I live in a quiet suburban town in a house I bought with my own hard-earned money, working as a senior data scientist for a major tech firm. My life is structured, logical, and built on a foundation of careful planning, a direct response to the chaos I grew up in. For years, my primary financial goal was to build a safety net so solid that no family emergency, no matter how manufactured, could ever drag me back into the precarious world my mother and brother seemed to thrive in. I thought I had succeeded. I thought the steel safe bolted to the floor of my home office, containing my emergency cash fund and important documents, was the ultimate symbol of my independence. But I underestimated the one person who knew all my childhood hiding spots, the one person who saw my success not as something to be proud of, but as a resource to be plundered for the sake of her favored child. This is the story of how my mother stole $50,000 from me to pay off my brother's gambling debts, and how a simple, three-word phrase brought the consequences of a lifetime of financial abuse crashing down on her in a matter of minutes. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. In my family, there have always been two ledgers. The first was the one everyone could see, the one my mother, Brenda, meticulously kept for the local historical society where she worked as a part-time bookkeeper. It was a testament to order and propriety, with neat columns and balanced accounts. This was the face she presented to the world. Brenda, the responsible 61-year-old widow who was so good with numbers, so trustworthy. The second ledger was invisible, unwritten, but felt far more heavily. It was the emotional and financial ledger she maintained for her two children, my younger brother, Kevin, and me. In this ledger, Kevin's accounts were always in the red, and I was always expected to be the asset that balanced the books. From the time we were kids, our roles were set in stone. Kevin, charming and reckless, was the golden child. When he broke a neighbor's window with a baseball, he was just being a boy. When I accidentally scuffed the kitchen floor, I was careless and ungrateful. His failures were framed as learning experiences. My successes were simply expected. He was an investment of love and emotion, while I was an investment of utility. As we grew up, this dynamic hardened. He drifted from one get-rich-quick scheme to another, eventually landing a job as a car salesman where his slick charm was an asset, but his discipline was non-existent. His paychecks vanished into what he vaguely called bad investments and helping out friends, which I knew was code for poker nights and sports betting. I, on the other hand, was the fixer, the responsible one. I excelled in school, not for praise, but for scholarships, because I knew there was no college fund waiting for me. I pursued a degree in data science because it was practical, stable, and lucrative. Every step I took was calculated to build a life of security, a fortress against the financial instability that was the hallmark of my mother and brother's existence. When I bought my first car, my mother co-signed the loan, not to help me, but to have a record of my finances. When I bought my house, she insisted on being there for the inspection, her eyes scanning not for structural flaws, but for signs of wealth, for assets that could be cataloged in her mental ledger. The safe in my office was the final brick in my fortress. It was a small, practical thing, but it held my emergency fund, $50,000 in cash, painstakingly saved over 5 years. It was my break glass in case of life fund for a sudden job loss, a medical crisis, or a catastrophic home repair. It was my peace of mind, tangible and real. The only other person who knew of its existence was my Uncle David, my mother's older brother. David, a retired high school principal, was the antithesis of his sister. He was a man of integrity and unwavering principles. He'd watched Brenda enable Kevin his whole life and had quietly supported my ambitions, often slipping me $100 bill in my college years with a knowing look that said, "This is for you, not for them." It was Uncle David who had advised me to keep a significant portion of my emergency fund in cash. "Banks can freeze assets, Joyce," he'd warned me once over coffee. "In a real crisis, cash is king, just be smart about it. He had his own system. After selling his business and retiring, he had a substantial portfolio, but he also had a fund he'd entrusted to me. It wasn't in my safe. It was a separate investment account that I managed for him, a gesture of trust that meant the world to me. The documentation for that fund, however, the account numbers, the brokerage details, the power of attorney, was locked securely inside my safe. It was a fund he planned to use for his dream of building a school in a developing country. It was his legacy. My safe protected not just my future, but his as well. My mother knew I had a safe. She'd seen it being installed and had made a passive-aggressive comment about it. "Oh, hiding the family jewels, are we?" she'd said with a tight smile. I just replied that it was for important documents. I kept 2 keys. One was on my person at all times, on a separate keychain from my house keys. The other was hidden. I thought it was cleverly hidden, in a place only I would think of, taped to the back of a loose floorboard under my bed, a spot I'd used for my diary as a teenager. It was a sentimental mistake, a foolish tell from my past that I should have known my mother, the keeper of all family secrets and histories, would remember. The dynamic had been escalating for months. Kevin's debts were piling up. He'd lost a significant amount of his dealership's money on a sure thing and was facing termination and possibly legal action. The panicked calls from my mother had become a daily occurrence. "He's your brother, Joyce. We have to help him. You have so much and he has so little. It's not fair." Each call was a chisel, chipping away at the walls I had built. I offered to help him with a financial planner. I offered to pay for counseling for his gambling addiction. I refused, point blank, to give him cash. "That's not help, Mom," I had told her firmly last week. "That's enabling." Her response was cold. "You've always been selfish. You never understood what family means." That was the last time we'd spoken, until today, the day she decided to balance the family ledger once and for all. The week leading up to the discovery was eerily quiet. After my firm refusal to bail Kevin out, my mother had gone silent. No more frantic calls, no more guilt-laden text messages. In the past, this silence was a prelude to one of 2 things. Either the problem had miraculously solved itself, which was rare, or my mother was maneuvering behind the scenes, preparing for a strategic move that I wouldn't see coming. I allowed myself a sliver of hope that perhaps, for once, Kevin was being forced to face the consequences of his own actions. It was a foolish hope, born from a desperate desire for a normal family dynamic that had never existed. The day it happened was a Tuesday. I had taken the day off work to handle some personal errands and was looking forward to a quiet afternoon. My mother had texted me in the morning, an unusually cheerful message. "Hi, sweetie. I'm going to be near your neighborhood around noon to drop off some old photo albums I found. Don't worry if you're out, I still have that spare key you gave me. I'll just leave them inside the door. Love you." I had given her a spare key years ago for emergencies, another thread of trust I had extended against my better judgment. The casual, breezy tone of the text should have been a red flag. My mother was never that nonchalant unless she was trying to mask a hidden agenda. But I was busy and distracted, so I replied with a simple, "Okay, thanks, Mom," and thought nothing more of it. I returned home around 3 in the afternoon. The house was quiet, just as I'd left it. Sitting right inside the front door was a dusty cardboard box filled with old, yellowing photo albums. It was exactly as she'd said. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. Maybe I had misjudged her. Maybe she was just trying to extend an olive branch, a peace offering after our tense conversation. I carried the box into the living room and sat on the floor, flipping through the pages. There I was, age 10, with a gap-toothed smile, holding a science fair trophy. And there was Kevin, age 8, grinning mischievously after accidentally letting the pet hamster escape. On every page, the unspoken family narrative was reinforced. Me, the serious, responsible one; him, the charming rogue. An inexplicable feeling of unease began to creep over me. It was a cold, prickling sensation on the back of my neck. Nothing was out of place. The TV was off, the mail was on the counter, the house was silent. Yet something felt fundamentally wrong. It felt violated. I walked through the downstairs rooms first, my senses on high alert. The kitchen was clean. The living room was tidy. Everything was as it should be. I climbed the stairs, my heart starting to beat a little faster. My bedroom door was slightly ajar, just as I'd left it. I pushed it open and scanned the room. The bed was made, the curtains were drawn. Everything looked normal. Then my eyes fell on the corner of the rug near my bed. It was crooked, shifted just a few inches from its usual position. I froze. That rug covered the loose floorboard, my hiding spot, the place where the spare key to my safe was taped. My breath caught in my throat. I told myself I was being paranoid. She wouldn't. She was my mother, but even as I thought it, I knew. This was the maneuver I hadn't seen coming. I dropped to my knees, my hands trembling as I pulled back the rug. The floorboard was there, perfectly in place. I used my fingernail to pry up the edge, just as I had done 1,000 times as a girl hiding my diary. My heart sank. The key was gone. The small piece of duct tape that had held it in place was still there, but the key itself had been taken. I scrambled to my feet and ran into my home office. The safe was in the closet, behind a stack of storage boxes. I threw the boxes aside, my movements frantic and clumsy. I reached for the handle of the safe door and pulled. It was locked. For a split second, a wave of relief washed over me. It's locked. Maybe she took the key but couldn't get in. Maybe she was just sending a message. But then I saw it. A tiny, fresh scratch on the black paint near the dial, a telltale sign of a key being hastily inserted and turned by an unfamiliar hand. My own key, the one I carried with me, was still in my purse. This meant she had used the spare. She had found it, taken it, and opened the safe. And then, crucially, she had locked it again, hoping I wouldn't notice for days or even weeks. I fumbled in my purse for my own key, my fingers numb and clumsy. I inserted it into the lock, turned it, and spun the handle. The heavy steel door swung open. The interior of the safe was organized. On the left, a stack of documents in plastic sleeves: my passport, my social security card, my car title, the deed to my house, and the portfolio for Uncle David's investment fund. On the right was a small, fireproof cash box. It was where I kept the $50,000. I lifted the box out. It felt light, impossibly light. My stomach turned to ice. I placed it on my desk and opened the lid. It was empty, all of it. Every last bill was gone. $50,000, the product of years of sacrifice, discipline, and deferred dreams, had vanished. There was nothing left inside but a single, folded piece of notebook paper. With a sense of dread so profound it made me feel dizzy, I unfolded it. It was my mother's handwriting, loopy and self-assured. It wasn't an apology, it was a declaration. It read, "Family helps family. Kevin needed this. You'll make more." For a long time, I just stood there in the silent office, the note from my mother clutched in my hand. The words, "family helps family," seemed to mock me from the page. This wasn't help, it was theft. This wasn't family, it was a parasitic relationship where I was the unwilling host. The initial shock, the icy dread that had seized me when I saw the empty box, slowly began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard rage. It was a rage that had been simmering just beneath the surface for years, an anger I had diligently suppressed for the sake of keeping the peace, for the illusion of a family. Now, the illusion was shattered. I sank into my office chair, the empty cash box on the desk in front of me like a tombstone marking the death of my relationship with my mother. I read the note again. "Kevin needed this. You'll make more." The sheer entitlement of it was breathtaking. The casual dismissal of my hard work, my sacrifice, my future, it was all just an inconvenience to her, a resource that had been rightfully reallocated to her precious son. She didn't see it as stealing from me. She saw it as transferring an asset from one part of the family business to another, from the profitable division, me, to the failing one, Kevin. And she, as the self-appointed CEO, had every right to make that executive decision. I thought about the years of work that money represented. The late nights at the office, debugging code until my eyes burned. The weekends spent studying for certifications to advance my career. The vacations I didn't take, the clothes I didn't buy, the modest car I drove. Every dollar in that box was a choice I had made, a small sacrifice in service of a larger goal: security. Freedom. The ability to stand on my own 2 feet without ever needing to ask anyone for anything. My mother had taken that from me. She had stolen more than money, she had stolen my peace of mind. My first instinct was to call her. To scream at her, to demand she bring it back, to unleash the torrent of fury and pain that was choking me. But I stopped myself, my hand hovering over my phone. What would that accomplish? She would deny it, then she would deflect, then she would guilt-trip me. How can you be so selfish, Joyce? Your brother was in trouble. He could have gone to jail. Do you care more about money than your own family? I could hear the words in her voice, dripping with manufactured indignation. An argument would be pointless. It would be a storm of emotion that would leave me drained and her more entrenched in her self-righteousness. She had planned this. The casual text, the photo albums as a distraction, the relocking of the safe, it was all a calculate. D-act. A person who plans something so deliberately isn't going to be swayed by an angry phone call. I took a deep breath, the data scientist part of my brain kicking in, pushing past the emotional turmoil. I needed to approach this logically. I needed evidence. I needed a strategy. Yelling was a waste of energy. Revenge, however, was a project, and a project required planning. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. "Did you like the old photos? So many good memories." The audacity was staggering. It was a taunt. She was checking to see if I had discovered the theft yet. She was toying with me. I typed back a simple, non-committal reply. "Just got home, haven't looked yet." Let her think I was still in the dark. Let her enjoy her fleeting sense of victory. Then a second text came through, this one from Kevin. "Hey Joyce, Mom helped me sort out that mess at work. Things are finally looking up." The message was accompanied by a picture of him raising a glass of champagne at what looked like an expensive restaurant. He was celebrating with my money. The rage flared again, hot and sharp, but I forced it back down. This was fuel. This was motivation. I stood up and walked back to the safe. All the important documents were still there. My passport, the deed to my house, and the folder for Uncle David's investment fund. I pulled it out and sat at my desk, my mind racing. The safe hadn't just held my cash. It held the proof of my uncle's trust in me. My mother knew David had his own money. She likely assumed whatever was in that folder was just my own personal investment information. She wouldn't have understood the nuance of a managed account, the power of attorney documents, the specific brokerage statements detailing a portfolio that was entirely separate from my own finances. To her, it was just more of Joyce's money. She had no idea she had walked into a minefield. Suddenly, a new feeling began to crystallize within me, pushing aside the anger and the grief. It was resolve. My mother and brother had operated on the assumption that I would eventually just give in, that I would absorb the loss because that was my designated role in the family. I was the shock absorber for their poor decisions. They assumed I would yell, I would cry, and then, ultimately, I would do nothing because family helps family. They had miscalculated. They had processed the data incorrectly. They had underestimated my ability to be as cold and methodical as the numbers I worked with every day. The family ledger my mother kept in her head was about to be audited, and I was going to be the one holding the pen. The hours after my discovery were a blur of controlled, methodical action. The emotional storm was still raging inside me, but on the surface, I was calm, my mind working with the cold precision of an algorithm processing a complex problem. My mother and brother had made a critical error. They assumed I would react with emotion. Instead, I was reacting with logic. My first step was to secure my environment. I immediately changed the locks on all my doors. The spare key my mother had was now useless. I then installed a new, high-tech security system with cameras covering every entry point, including a small, discreet one in my home office pointed directly at the closet where the safe was located. If she ever tried to enter my home again, I would have a clear, undeniable record of it. It was an expense, but it was an investment in reclaiming the sense of security she had stolen from me. Next, I needed to confirm where the money went. It was a long shot, but I had to try. My brother, Kevin, for all his slick salesmanship, was notoriously sloppy. He lived his life online, craving validation and attention. I opened my laptop and started digging. It didn't take long. His social media was a goldmine of incriminating evidence. The champagne picture he'd sent me was posted publicly, tagged at a 5-star restaurant. The caption read, "Celebrating a new chapter." Big things coming. In the comments, a friend asked, "Dude, did you win the lottery?" Kevin's reply was a winking emoji and the comment, something like that. "Let's just say a family investment finally paid off." The irony was so thick it was suffocating. I kept digging. I found his profile on a popular payment app, the one he always used to pay his poker buddies. His transaction history wasn't private. I scrolled back through the last 24 hours. There it was, a series of large payments to individuals I recognized as his known gambling associates. The payments totaled nearly $40,000. The descriptions were brazen: debt paid, even Stevens, now leave me alone. He wasn't even trying to hide it. Why would he? In his mind, it was his money now, a gift from his ever-doting mother, funded by his ever-responsible sister. He was washing his hands of his problems with my life savings. The remaining $10,000, I surmised, was likely in his pocket, or already spent on the celebratory dinner, and whatever other extravagances he felt he was owed. With the digital trail documented and screenshots saved to a secure cloud drive, my next step was the most crucial. It involved my Uncle David. I felt a surge of guilt and shame. He had trusted me, not just to manage his fund, but to be the secure, stable branch of a chaotic family tree. My home, my safe, they were meant to be the repository of that trust. Now, that had been violated, but I knew David. He was a man of logic and principle, not sentimentality when it came to right and wrong. He would be angry, but his anger would be directed at the correct target, his sister. I picked up the phone and called him. I kept my voice even, betraying none of the turmoil I was feeling. "Uncle David," I said, "I need to talk to you about something important regarding the fund. Are you free to come over tomorrow afternoon?" "Joyce, you sound serious. Is everything all right?" he asked, his tone immediately sharpened with concern. "Everything is under control," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "But there's a situation with my mother that has created a potential complication. I'd rather discuss it in person. It's time-sensitive." The mention of his sister was all he needed to hear. "I'll be there at 2. Don't you worry, Joyce. We'll sort it out." The final piece of preparation was the most difficult. I had to create the right environment for the confrontation that was to come. I spent the evening tidying the house, not out of a sense of domestic duty, but as a way of reclaiming my space, of purifying it from my mother's invasive presence. I removed every family photo that included her and Kevin. I packed them away in the same dusty box of photo albums she had used as her Trojan horse and stored it in the attic. My home was now a neutral ground, my territory. As I worked, I thought about the 3 words from the story's title. The phrase I would whisper to my mother. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about exposing the truth in the most efficient way possible. My mother's power came from her ability to manipulate emotions, to create a fog of guilt and obligation that obscured the facts. I couldn't beat her in an emotional argument, but I could beat her with facts. I was a data scientist. Data was my weapon. The investment fund Uncle David had entrusted to me was the key. My mother had stolen my cash, but in doing so, she had unknowingly made herself vulnerable to a much greater threat. She thought she had balanced her imaginary family ledger, but she had just made a catastrophic error in a real one, and the consequences were about to be calculated. The stage was set. All the players were about to take their positions. All I had to do now was wait for the curtain to rise. The next day, I woke up with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. The grief over the stolen money was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but it was overshadowed by a steely sense of purpose. Today was the day the family's secret ledger would finally be audited, and the debt would be called in. My plan was simple, relying not on complex theatrics, but on precise timing and my mother's own predictable psychology. She operated on 2 core principles: an unshakable belief in her own righteousness and a deep-seated fear of her brother, David. While she viewed me as an extension of herself, a resource to be managed, she saw David as an external authority figure. He was the one member of the family whose respect she craved but had never truly earned, the one person she couldn't manipulate with tears or guilt. His disapproval was her kryptonite. At noon, I called my mother. I pitched my voice to sound weary and defeated, the way she expected me to sound. "Mom," I started, letting out a heavy sigh. I saw the note. I know you took the money." There was a brief pause on the other end, followed by the sound of her own sigh, this one laced with performative sympathy. "Oh, Joyce, I know you're upset, honey, but you have to understand, it was an emergency. Kevin was in real trouble. This is what families do for each other. We sacrifice." $50,000, Mom? That wasn't a sacrifice. That was my entire emergency fund. My voice cracked on cue. I needed her to believe she had broken me. "Money is just money, Joyce," she said, her tone becoming firmer, more patronizing. "You're smart. You'll make more. Family is forever. Your brother needed a clean slate, a chance to finally get ahead. You should be happy for him." This was the opening I was waiting for. "A clean slate," I repeated hollowly. "Okay, if this is what it takes to make things right with the family, then I guess I have to accept it." I could almost hear the smug smile forming on her face. Victory, I had capitulated just as I always did. "That's my girl," she said, her voice warm and condescending. "I knew you'd understand. Now can we put this behind us? I was thinky. NG of coming over this afternoon to talk things through properly, help you see the bigger picture." "Okay," I whispered. "Come over around 3. "I'll be there," she promised. "We'll get through this together." She had taken the bait perfectly. The next call was to my Uncle David, confirming his 2:00 p.m. arrival. He would be here a full hour before my mother. That hour was critical. When he arrived, I didn't waste any time with small talk. I led him straight to my office. I showed him the empty cash box, the note from my mother, and the screenshots of Kevin's transactions. His face, normally kind and grandfatherly, hardened into a mask of cold fury. As a retired principal, he had a low tolerance for deceit and a zero-tolerance policy for theft. "She stole from you," he said, his voice a low growl. "After everything you've done, after how hard you've worked, she stole your future to pay for his failures." "She did," I confirmed calmly. "But that's not the only reason I asked you here. When she opened the safe, she exposed herself to a much bigger problem. Your problem." I handed him the folder containing the documentation for his investment fund. "All the paperwork for your legacy fund was in there, David. Account numbers, power of attorney, everything." He took the folder, his eyes scanning the documents. He looked up at me, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "She wouldn't know what to do with this." "Exactly," I said. "She wouldn't know what it is. She would just see account statements with large numbers on them and assume it's all my money. She has no idea it's a separate fund that I manage for you. She has no concept that this money belongs to her older brother, the one person on this earth she's afraid of." A slow understanding dawned on his face. "So what's the plan, Joyce?" "The plan is already in motion. She's coming here at 3 o'clock, convinced she's going to give me a lecture on the importance of family. She thinks I've accepted the loss of the $50,000. She's walking in here feeling smug and victorious." I leaned forward, my voice dropping. "When she gets here, you're going to be in the living room. I want you to let me handle the first part of the conversation. And then, at the right moment, you're going to walk in and ask her one simple question." I told him the question. "Brenda, where's the investment fund I trusted Joyce with?" David nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. He understood perfectly. My mother's crime wasn't just stealing $50,000 from her daughter. Her crime was that, in her greed and arrogance, she had trespassed into his world. She had, in her mind, stolen from him too. We sat in the living room and waited. The air was thick with anticipation. David was silent, his jaw set, radiating an aura of quiet authority that could quell a school cafeteria riot. I felt strangely calm. The trap was set. All the variables were accounted for. The bait was my feigned submission. The trigger was a single question. And the prey, my own mother, was already on her way, completely unaware that she was not coming to a lecture, but to a final exam she was utterly unprepared to pass. At exactly 3 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I opened the front door to find my mother, Brenda, standing on the porch with an expression of performative concern etched on her face. She was holding a Tupperware container. "I brought you some lasagna," she said softly, as if it were a peace offering, a down payment on the forgiveness she felt she was owed. "Thanks, Mom," I said, my voice flat. I took the container and stepped aside to let her in. She walked into the living room, her eyes scanning the space, likely looking for signs of a breakdown, tissues on the coffee table, red-rimmed eyes. When she saw nothing but a clean, orderly room, her mask of sympathy tightened slightly. She preferred me to be a mess. It made her role as the righteous matriarch easier to play. She sat on the sofa, patting the cushion next to her. "Come, sit with me, Joyce. Let's talk this out." I remained standing. "There's not much to talk about. You took the money. Kevin has it. It's done." "It's not that simple," she began, launching into the speech she had no doubt been rehearsing. "A mother has to make difficult choices. I saw your brother drowning, and you had a life raft. A big, beautiful life raft that you weren't even using. I just extended it to him. One day, when you have children, you'll understand." "So you stole from your daughter to give to your son," I stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "You broke into my house, found the key to my safe, and took every penny of my emergency savings." A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. My calm refusal to play the victim was throwing her off script. "Don't be so dramatic, Joyce. I used a spare key you gave me, and it's not stealing when it's family. Think of it as a loan, a long-term, interest-free loan from you to your brother. A loan he'll never repay, I could. Entered. He'll pay it back to the family by being successful," she insisted, her voice rising. "This was the fresh start he needed. Your $50,000 bought him a future. You should be proud to have been able to provide that. You owe the family that much after all the advantages you've had." She smirked then, a small, self-satisfied smile that sealed her fate. "Honestly, I don't know why you're making such a fuss." I just nodded slowly, letting her words hang in the air. I let the silence stretch, forcing her to stew in her own arrogance. Finally, I said the two words she expected to hear. "If you say so." Her smirk widened. She had won. She leaned back into the sofa cushions, triumphant. "I knew you'd come around." It was at that precise moment that my Uncle David walked into the room from the adjoining dining area, where he had been waiting silently. He held the folder for his investment fund in his hand. Brenda's entire body went rigid. The color drained from her face. Seeing her brother here in my house was a variable she had not accounted for. "David, what are you doing here?" she stammered, her voice suddenly high-pitched and strained. David didn't answer her. He walked slowly, deliberately, until he was standing directly in front of her. He looked down at his sister, his expression one of profound disappointment and cold anger. He held up the folder. "Brenda," he asked, his voice low and steady, a tone that had struck fear into generations of misbehaving high school students. "I came to check on something. Where's the investment fund I trusted Joyce with?" My mother's face went from pale to ghostly white. Her eyes darted from David to the folder to me. Her mind was clearly racing, trying to process this new, catastrophic piece of information. The fund, David's fund, she had seen the paperwork in the safe. She had seen the account balances. She had assumed it was all mine. I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered, her voice trembling. "That's Joyce's money. It's her investments." "No, Brenda, it is not," David said, his voice cutting through the air like glass. "It's my retirement fund. The money I set aside for the school project. The fund I entrusted to my niece because, unlike others in this family, she is responsible and trustworthy. The detailed account documents were in her safe. The safe you opened." Brenda's jaw worked, but no sound came out. She looked at me, her eyes wide with panic and disbelief. She was trapped. Her lie had been exposed from an angle she never saw coming. She couldn't use her usual tactics on David. She couldn't cry, she couldn't guilt-trip him, she couldn't tell him he owed the family. She had no leverage. This was my moment. I leaned in close to her, so close that only she could hear me, and I whispered the 3 words that would bring her world crashing down. "Call the police." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact of what was about to happen. For a split second, she looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. Then, the reality of her situation hit her with the force of a physical blow. She turned back to her brother, her face a mask of desperation. "David, please," she begged. It was a misunderstanding, a terrible mistake. But David wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at me, and I gave him a single, almost imperceptible nod. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. He looked back at Brenda, his face grim. "You broke into your daughter's home and stole $50,000, but you also compromised the security of my entire retirement fund. This isn't a family squabble anymore, Brenda. This is a crime." He looked down at his phone, and I watched him dial a number. My mother made a small, choking sound in the back of her throat. She stared at her brother, then at me, her mind finally grasping the full extent of her miscalculation. She had gambled everything on the belief that I was weak, that family ties would be her shield. She had been wrong. 10 minutes passed in suffocating silence. My mother sat frozen on the couch, tears silently streaming down her face. They weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of self-pity, of a cornered animal realizing there was no escape. And then, we all heard it. The crunch of tires on the gravel of my driveway, followed by the sweep of red and blue headlights flashing through the living room window. The arrival of the police was a quiet, almost surreal affair. 2 officers, a man and a woman, came to the door. They were calm, professional, and their presence seemed to suck all the dramatic, emotional energy out of the room, leaving only the cold, hard facts. My Uncle David met them at the door and explained the situation in his clear, authoritative voice: a break-in, a theft from a private safe, and a perpetrator who was still on the premises. My mother, Brenda, seemed to shrink into the sofa cushions. The formidable matriarch who had rule. Our family, through guilt and manipulation, was gone. In her place was a frightened, 61-year-old woman who was completely out of her depth. When the officers entered the living room and addressed her, she could barely speak, only managing to shake her head and whisper that it was all a family misunderstanding. But I had the evidence. I presented them with the note she had left in the empty cash box. I showed them the screenshots of Kevin's social media posts and his public payment app transactions, a clear digital breadcrumb trail showing exactly where a large portion of the money had gone. Uncle David explained the separate issue of his compromised financial documents, adding a layer of gravity to the situation. It wasn't just cash, it was sensitive financial data. The officers listened patiently, taking notes. They asked me if I wanted to press charges. The question hung in the air, the final, irreversible decision point. My mother looked at me, her eyes pleading for the first time in her life. She was begging me to uphold the family code she herself had shattered, the code where family protects its own, no matter the transgression. For a fleeting second, I felt a pang of something, not pity, but a deep, sorrowful ache for the mother I wished I'd had. But then I looked at the empty space on my desk where the cash box used to be. I thought of the years of sacrifice she had erased with a single, selfish act. I thought of the smirk on her face when she told me I owed the family. "Yes," I said, my voice steady and clear. "Yes, I do." The consequences cascaded quickly after that. My mother was arrested. She wasn't handcuffed in my living room, but was quietly escorted out to the patrol car. The humiliation of her neighbors seeing her being driven away in a police car was, I knew, a punishment far worse for her than any legal penalty. She was charged with burglary and grand larceny. The evidence was overwhelming. Her defense that it was a family loan fell apart under the slightest scrutiny. There was no loan agreement, and my explicit refusal to give her money beforehand established a clear lack of consent. Kevin was implicated as well. When the police investigated the flow of money, they discovered his role in receiving and distributing the stolen funds. He was charged as an accessory. His fresh start evaporated overnight. He lost his job at the car dealership, and his gambling debts, which he had so gleefully paid off, became the central exhibit in the prosecution's case against him and my mother. The legal battle was messy and draining, but I refused to back down. My Uncle David stood by me through the entire process, a pillar of unwavering support. My mother and brother, faced with the undeniable proof of their actions, eventually accepted a plea bargain. My mother received a sentence of 5 years of probation, a hefty fine, and court-mandated restitution payments. She would be paying me back a small amount every month for the rest of her life, a constant, galling reminder of her crime. Kevin got a similar sentence, and the felony on his record made finding another sales job nearly impossible. Their lives were permanently altered, their futures diminished not by me, but by the weight of their own choices. The stolen money, of course, was mostly gone. I never saw the full $50,000 again. But in the end, I realized the revenge was never about getting the money back. It was about reclaiming my life. It was about severing a toxic tie that had been draining me for decades. It was about forcing an audit of a corrupt family ledger and exposing the rot at its core. Our family, as I had known it, ceased to exist. I have not spoken to my mother or brother since the day of the arrest. Uncle David and I are closer than ever. My home is finally the sanctuary it was always meant to be, secured by new locks and the knowledge that I am the only one with the keys. Sometimes I think about the note she left me. Family helps family. She was right, in a way. On that day, my true family, my Uncle David, helped me. He helped me find the strength to close the book on a lifetime of emotional debt and finally, truly, balance my own accounts. The price was high, but the peace I gained was priceless.